So this is ground ivy. It is a one of the herbs that we harvest at this time of year here in late May. Although this plant is a tiny little plant. It's from the mint family. The Latin name is Glechoma hederacea. And it is, because it's such a small plant, fortunately we have the advantage of it comes into flower sometime in late April, early May, and it continues to flower for quite a long time, right up until early mid-June. And so that gives us the opportunity to allow it to grow a bit more. For a lot of plants, we harvest them when they first start flowering. But with this one, we want to wait until it's still sort of in the peak of its flowering, but it's almost done. So by that time, they might be twice as high. Now, if it was growing in an area with a lot of tall grass, it might grow even taller. But we want to wait until they're, at least a foot high, because the stalks are so small and the portion that we harvest doesn't weigh very much. It's a thing with, it's not just based on the size of it. It's a thing with plants from the mint family. They have a lot of air spaces in their tissues, so they're not very dense. So what you harvest that looks like it might weigh 2 grams might only weigh 1 gram. Now there are some exceptions. There are some mints like the Bugle, which I just harvested a few days ago, which is a much more succulent mint, and it weighs a little bit more. But a lot of the mint family plants are very light, meaning you end up having to harvest a lot more than you think you have to get the weight you need. And of course, we're harvesting by weight because that's how we determine the potency of the tinctures that we make from it. Of course, if you're just drying it and making a tea, it doesn't matter so much. But with me, because I'm making fresh herb tinctures, weight is really critical, because there's a very specific weight for each size jar of tincture that we macerate. Macerating meaning the soaking of the herbs in it for a period of time. And in order to maintain consistency of potency, I have to use the same weight every time. Anyway, so ground ivy, we typically harvest around late May, early June, when it's getting close to its peak size, but still very much fully in flower. I would say end of the first week of June is a very typical time for me to harvest, or somewhere in the first week of June. We typically harvest, now again, when I harvested, it would be much taller, but I'll harvest about, like, say, that much, meaning leaving only about maybe 3 or 4 inches of stalk in the ground. Now, normally I wouldn't harvest that aggressively with a plant, because typically we're harvesting plants that continue to grow. And for that reason, if I harvest too much of the plant, it creates 2 problems. One is we get more stalk relative to leaf and flower, which means a lot more processing and a lot more that has to be thrown away. But it also stresses out the plant a lot. But the thing about ground ivy is that once it flowers, these stalks don't continue to grow. Ground ivy grows like a runner along the ground and has pairs of these sort of roundish leaves. I don't see any here along the ground, but they're there. Anyway, and they run along the ground, and in the springtime, they send up these stalks that flower, and they go to seed, and then they completely die back. So it's okay to aggressively harvest these stalks, because once it finishes flowering, they just completely die back. And through the rest of the year, it just, the runners that run along the ground and the leaves that run along the ground are all that's left of the plant. So it's not like I'm harvesting something that needs to keep growing. So I can harvest more of a maximum amount of those stalks when it's time to harvest them. They still don't weigh a lot, and like a lot of plants, the stalk itself is a lot less potent than the leaves and flowers. So typically what we're doing is we're stripping the leaves and flowers off about 3/4 of the stalk, and just we remove that bottom 3/4 of the stalk, and we're using the tips and all of the leaves and the flowers that we stripped off it. Now, if you're going to dry it to make a tea, you can dry it on the stalk. and then strip the leaves and flowers off later. You can use the stalks too. It's a lot, it dilutes the potency of the medicine. Anyway, so ground ivy is from the mint family, as I said. Like a lot of plants, it's very, not all, but a lot of mint plants, it's very aromatic. And when people often notice it, they may not notice it at all, but when they're mowing their lawn, it often grows on people's lawns. It's particularly well adapted to growing in shady areas. So shady patches of lawn, it will come up like crazy, and people tend to be obsessed with mowing lawns. As you can see, I am not. I mow around all these medicines that grow here. And over the years of living here, there's like 60, 70 different medicinal plants growing on what would have been our front lawn. But anyway, but people mow it down and they get this waft of this beautiful minty kind of aroma, and they say, what is that coming from? Usually means that you just mowed down some ground ivy. So like a lot of mint plants, it's got a variety of uses. It can be used topically for cuts and scrapes and deeper, because it's aromatic and has a lot of very penetrating constituents. It can be used for deeper injuries like sprains and strains and bruises and things like that. And similarly, when taken internally, just like I'd mentioned with the comfrey earlier, it's very healing and anti-inflammatory in the mouth and the throat and the digestive tract. So it's used for sore throats, for ulcers, and other types of inflammatory surface things on the surface of the mucous membranes in the digestive tract. Internally, it's a very, very good herb for the nervous system. It's good for insomnia, for stress, anxiety, depression. It's somewhat good because it's a fairly good herb for increasing blood flow to the brain, and has a lot of constituents that act in the central nervous system. It's somewhat good for dementias and poor concentration and things of that nature as well. It's really good in cold and flu formulas. It's drying to the sinuses if you have a runny nose. It's a fairly good expectorant for coughs. And like most herbs in the mint family, it's antiviral. What other are the main things I use it for? It's good for urinary tract inflammation, including urinary tract infections. It does have some action on the actual infectious agent in the urinary tract, but also it improves urinary function and helps reduce inflammation. What else can I say about it? I would say those are the main things that we use it for. I especially, it's good for digestion. Really good for gas, bloating, and indigestion. You can use it as a tea or a tincture acutely if you overeat or you eat something that doesn't agree with you, or you can use it more long-term for people that have chronic digestive problems. Very effective there as well.